Welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Joshua Barnes. Let's take a look at our headlines. US President Donald Trump says he will try to reclaim some territory for Ukraine during his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin this Friday. Trump does claim, however, that he will need to cede land for both countries, while he says he will know within minutes if Putin wants to end the war. This comes as European leaders and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky plan to speak with President Trump ahead of this summit in Alaska, amid fears that Washington could impose unfavourable peace terms on Ukraine. Zelensky says there is no sign Russia is preparing for peace as it stands. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu is in denial about Gaza's humanitarian crisis as Australia moves to recognise a Palestinian state at next month's UN General Assembly. This comes as Israel has stepped up Gaza City strikes after Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to push on with his offensive. Pakistan has welcomed a move by the United States that designates the Pakistani separatist Baloch Liberation Army as a foreign terrorist organisation. The BLA is the strongest of several insurgent groups operating near the Afghanistan-Iran border. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump says he is sending 800 National Guard troops to Washington and temporarily taking control of the city's police department. The move bypasses the city's elected leaders. The United States and China have extended their tariff truce for 90 days, avoiding triple-digit duties as US retailers prepare for the holiday season. Trump has signed an executive order suspending higher tariffs until November the 10th, with all other terms remaining in place. Meanwhile, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will visit the United States this month for his first meeting with President Donald Trump since taking office. The meeting on August the 25th will highlight a new trade deal and shared security issues. And Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has spoken with China's President Xi Jinping on the phone for 1 hour, discussing BRICS, bilateral business and the G20's role in defending multilateralism. Both leaders agreed on strengthening the bloc's influence. We start in the Middle East as Israeli official Reuven Azar has defended Israel's military actions in Gaza, stating that their forces have killed thousands of Hamas members. Azar emphasised that civilian casualties are a tragic result of Hamas using civilians as human shields, launching rockets from populated areas and obstructing aid deliveries. He also highlighted Israel's efforts to allow millions of tons of food into Gaza, accusing Hamas of diverting supplies and worsening the humanitarian crisis. This came as Indian political leader Priyanka Gandhi Vadra had sharply criticised Israel, accusing it of committing genocide and causing the deaths of over 60,000 Palestinians, including thousands of children. She condemned the Indian government's silence amid what she calls a devastating humanitarian crisis, calling inaction a crime. While joining us to discuss these comments will be Patrick Pine, but while we wait for him to connect, of course, let's provide some context on this situation. An expanded military operation from Israel was announced by Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that Gaza City would be taken control of, around 70 to 75% of Gaza already under the control of IDF forces. And of course, now this further announcement of escalation of military activity has seen condemnation from world leaders and global political figures. We are now joined by Patrick Pine, a strategic and international affairs expert who's joining us live from New Delhi. Patrick, let's have a look at this defence of Benjamin Netanyahu's offensive, which we know from his point of view is going to be looking to control the whole of Gaza. Officials in Israel saying this is necessary, blaming Hamas for the humanitarian crisis and accusing Hamas of living within communities, using these communities and civilians as human shields. Is this, in your opinion, a truthful response, or is this again both sides disagreeing and saying contrary things?
Well, if you look at the way Hamas operates, there is quite a bit of merit in the fact that Hamas does operate from civilian areas. They use civilian buildings for their headquarters, for creating their ammunition depot, for putting their intelligence divisions there. They launch missiles from the hotbed of civilian enclaves, so that even if there is a retaliation, it leads to collateral damages, casualty of civilians, and then the propaganda game of how their adversary, which is the Israeli Defense Force in this case, is responsible for the killing of the ordinary Palestinians. This has been going on for a long time, and we have seen how this template of using civilian enclaves for launching operations against the adversary, we have seen how it has been used even by Pakistan armed forces during Operation Sindoor, where India was at conflict with them. We have seen how they were using missiles from civilian areas. So there is absolutely no denial of the fact that Hamas operates this way. They have a stranglehold. The entire governance of Gaza was handed over to Hamas in 2007. From 2007 to 2025, they could have done a lot in terms of creating a model state out of Gaza. Unfortunately, it did not happen that way. There have been series of terror attacks, and then the October attack of 2023 happened. Whether what Israel does is right or wrong, well, that is subject to debates. But if they don't take it to a logical conclusion, then what invariably would happen is this, that the next attack by Hamas would just be around the corner. So it's a vicious cycle of conflict going on, where Israel, being a very small country with a very limited population, is looking at what is best for them. Yes, it does lead to casualties. It does lead to loss of lives. But I think they're looking for controlling Gaza all over again, as was the case before 2007. Whether it would lead to peace, well, that we have to wait and watch.
Patakrit, let's now look at some of the international condemnation of what's been happening. Of course, these comments from Priyanka Gandhi Vadra, who has obviously spoken out about inaction from the Indian government, but also using strong terms which Israel has continued to deny throughout this conflict, including the use of the word genocide, and say that Israel is directly causing the deaths of over 60,000 Palestinian civilians and people. Do you think that these comments will see any action from the Indian government in terms of potential condemnation? And let's look wider as well. There's a two-part to this question. Do you think we're going to see a shift more broadly from countries that haven't spoken out yet about what is going on in the Gaza Strip?
Well, first and foremost, India has nothing to do with this. India has always spoken in favor of peace. India has advocated the two-nation theory, and there is nothing more that India can do beyond this. There are conflicts going on in many parts of the world, including in India's neighborhood, including India's challenges that we face from Pakistan. So I think these kind of statements will not have an impact so far as India's foreign policy is concerned. Israel is a strategic partner of India, and India is doing what is necessary to be done in the greater interest of India and in the greater interest of fight against terrorism. At the same time, India has always advocated for the people of Palestine. There has been no shift in that policy. On the other hand, it is important to note that some of the politicians do speak about Palestinians, but I find there is an absence when it comes to, there is a void when it comes to speaking on atrocities happening in other parts of the world. I would love to see some of these politicians making comments on the atrocities and genocidal killings that do happen in Bangladesh against the Hindu minorities. I would love to see some of them making strong statements against, the genocidal killings of Hindus and Sikhs that happen in Pakistan. So some of these politicians, including the one that you mentioned, it appears that there is a standard template on which they keep on writing or tweeting these things. But the way they speak for Palestine, I have never seen them speaking on behalf of the Hindu minorities of Bangladesh or Pakistan. Secondly, right now, there is a conflict going on in Syria as well, where the Sunni radical Islamist organizations are, massacring the Jews. Why is there no statement on that? Why is
Yes, Patakrit, unfortunately we are out of time, but thank you ever so much for providing that insight. Of course, an extremely divisive topic across the world, but a continued topic that must be had around the situation in Gaza, of course, following the October 7th attack and then continued military action within Gaza. But let's now head from a Middle Eastern conflict to a European conflict. There's 27 European heads of state and governments say that Ukrainians must have the freedom to decide their future and that a diplomatic solution must protect Ukrainian and European interests. Meaningful negotiations can only take place in the context of a ceasefire or reduction of hostilities. That was a comment from a statement from the leaders. They also added, "We share the conviction that a diplomatic solution must protect Ukraine's and Europe's vital security interests." The statement, agreed late on Monday and published on Tuesday, was endorsed by leaders of all EU member countries except from Hungary. Well, joining us live to discuss these comments and the wider ramifications as the Russia-Ukraine war hits a vital moment of discussion and diplomacy over moving towards peace. Thomas Porteous, anchor and correspondent from the newsroom. Thomas, let's first look at this joint statement that has been released. I want to pick out a couple of key points here, not just mentioning Ukraine's security, but also Europe's security. Do you think that European security in the face of perceived Russian aggression from a European point of view is a priority now that the war has gone on for so long?
Well, of course it is, Josh. Europe has been very outspoken about it still seeing Russia as very much a threat to the rest of the European continent. We've seen Keir Starmer, we've seen Emmanuel Macron voice this openly, that they think that Russia continues to be a threat to Europe as a whole. Vladimir Putin is a staunch admirer of the Soviet Union and believes that the collapse of the Soviet Union is one of the biggest tragedies ever to happen in history. Also, we have to bear in mind, however, that most of the European nations are part of NATO in this regard. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization does cover around over 25 nations in Europe. And so we do have that. That, of course, was one of the reasons for the war. Ukraine was becoming very close to joining NATO. However, yes, European security, a top priority. People have compared this to appeasement back in the war, if territorial, back in the Second World War, which led to Hitler invading Poland. A lot of European powers say that if territory is conceded, given to Putin, given his invasion, this is being seen as conceding to Putin. And European powers are very much worried that if Vladimir Putin can take parts of Ukraine and be allowed to do that, then what can he do next?
Yes, and Thomas, let's look at some information that we brought earlier in the day. European leaders and potentially Volodymyr Zelensky hoping and planning to speak to Donald Trump before that meeting with Putin in Alaska on Friday the 15th. Do you think this is a last-ditch attempt for Europe to get their message across before Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are in their own confines and can construct a deal that might not have European and Ukrainian interests at the key?
Well, as you've spoken about previously, Ukraine's sovereignty is what is the biggest worry here. There's no doubt that when Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump meet in Alaska, there will be photos, there will be showmanship. However, what's going to be on people's mind is if Ukraine is going to have a point in this discussion. We've talked about this. Russia is around 55 miles from Alaska, where Donald Trump are having this discussion. However, Ukraine is over 5,000 miles away from where Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will be having this conversation. And so these two leaders talking about a war that's 5,000 miles away and possibly conceding, letting land go to Russia, that's over 5,000 miles away is worrying to a lot of nations, including Europe. And so, of course, there is huge worries here that Donald Trump will possibly warm to Vladimir Putin once again.
Yes, and Thomas, let's look now at that meeting. We've skirted around it, but of course this is pivotal, a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin that has been a long time coming, but of course with no Ukrainian representation. Donald Trump saying that he will do his best to try and get Ukrainian land back, but in the same breath saying that, that Ukraine and Russia will both need to cede land. But Ukraine doesn't really control any of Russia. So what's your thoughts and insights on these comments?
Well, yeah, as you said, Russia currently controls around 20% of Ukrainian territory. Over a 4-year period, that's what they've managed to gain. They are continuing to make small gains, of course. However, Donald Trump has touted that both sides will in fact make concessions in this war. You do have to bear in mind that Russia does see Crimea, of course, as part of its territory, which the United Nations and the international community does not. But it's hard to see Moscow conceding any territory to Ukraine, given the current circumstances on the battlefield.
Thomas Porteous, thank you for all of that insight. Of course, all eyes are focused on that meeting in Alaska on Friday, but several separate ramifications and conversations that could be had and potentially change the discourse ahead of that meeting. But let's stay in Europe, as record-breaking heat waves have swept the globe this year, with dangerous temperatures scorching the United States, southern Europe and beyond. Scientists say climate change is the main driver, making extreme heat more frequent and intense. Let's listen to what some locals from affected regions of these recent wildfires have had to say.
En media hora arrasó. Venía el viento a favor y metió el fuego en el pueblo. Fue un milagro de Dios, no fueron aún los medios ayudaron, sí, pero fue un milagro de Dios que no ardiera en todo el pueblo. Porque tú mira cómo llegó el fuego a 10 metros de las casas. Increíble.
Ose Komunitetet Evropiane nuk e di më çfarë mund të them. Pa helikoptere këtu s'bot, jo se tu s'ka asnjë rrugë makinash, se zjarr fiksë sypin dot atje. Se s'ka rrugë makina. Zjarr fiksët janë aty, deri tash pari ore kanë qenë aty. E fikën ty afër shtëpive, edhe tash s'kan çfarë bën sive.
Estamos totalmente indefensos, abandonados. Por favor, a quien toque, hacer algo por nosotros que nos estamos quemando. Y no es un parque natural, pero somos personas, nadie hace nada, nadie.
Ima nešto, jedan dio kuća koji je zahvaćen, ali evo vjerujte sa preko 20 vozila, sa mobilizacijom čitave jedinice, sve 4 smjene su mobilizovane, znači svi vatrogasci su na licu mjesta, znači ono što je jednostavno neizvodljivo, znači da prođe bez posljedica, odnosno da ne bude neki objekat ugrožen, kao što sam rekao, ima ugroženih objekata, ima neki što ih je zahvatio požar, ali sve radimo kako bismo ovaj požar stavili pod kontrolu.
Well, in June, US cities endured temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius. In early July, Europe faced an exceptional heat wave, while ocean surface temperatures reached record highs. Heat has already killed more than 2,300 people across 12 European cities this year. In Spain, Portugal, Montenegro and across the Balkans, wildfires fueled by dry vegetation and strong winds have forced mass evacuations. Experts warn the Mediterranean is increasingly vulnerable, with hotter, drier summers boosting the risk of fast-spreading blazes. Well, joining us will be Desmond Majikadonmu, who will be discussing, as an environmentalist, the ramifications of what we're seeing. But let's provide some context, of course, to this. We mentioned wildfires across the world. There have been wildfires in Asia, in South Korea, Japan, in the US, of course, in LA, but in other regions as well. In Europe, which is in the grips of another heat wave with further wildfires, has seen blazes being battled in France, in Spain, in Greece, in Turkey. large parts of this Mediterranean portion of this continent facing the risk of wildfires, something which of course needs a resolution, but a problem that might be already moving too fast, too quickly. Desmond, thank you so much for joining us live from Lagos. We've had a conversation recently about wildfires in France on this programme. Further wildfires being reported in the Mediterranean region of Europe. Why is this time of year so significant in terms of temperatures, but also in terms of the wildfire risk, something that seems to be happening on at least a fortnightly basis?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And as you said it's moving far too much, far too fast. And the harsh reality, though, is that this has been predicted by scientists, not prophets, although way back some of the prophets have said things like that. But the scientists have categorically stated that this would happen because we are heating up the planet far too much. This is a classic sign of global warming. It's not that we haven't had fires all along for centuries and centuries, but the frequency and the severity of these fires are now classic symptoms of what happens when you overheat the planet and you have very unstable weather patterns. So you can have like a dry season that'll go on for a long, long time. And you have all this dry weather and the plant life becomes very dry. All you need is just one lightning spot, like what happened in America on the 4th of July. In Arizona, that fire that started on the 4th of July is still burning till today, and it hasn't even been 50% contained. And of course now Europe is getting hit left, right, and center. It's happened here in Africa, it's happening in India. It's a classic symptom of global warming causing this climate change. And it's a warning. It's a warning to humanity that we have to change. We can no longer continue to be pumping these millions and millions of tons of trapping gases.
Yes, Desmond. Of course, wildfires, one impact that we're seeing, of course, a death reported of a Romanian boy who was just a handful of years old from these wildfires. But it's not just the impact on humans and civilization and infrastructure, also the seas are warming at an alarming rate in and around the Mediterranean. What's the impact of a rising sea temperature for wildlife and the ecosystems?
Yeah, this is a very, very relevant question because, you know, the fact that we don't really see the sea, if you see what I mean, the amount of life form that is under our waters, it's even more than what we have on land. And the oceans and the seas, they play such a vital role in stabilizing the atmospheric gases. They also sequester a lot of CO2, and they are part of the wonderful, intricate wonders of nature that makes this planet habitable. By warming the seas, we're killing off massive amounts of life forms. We're negatively impacting on the corals, and the corals play such an important role. We're negatively impacting on the phytoplankton, which are essential for life on Earth. They're more essential to an extent than a lot of the rainforests even. They're like, you know, sort of the sea rainforest. And then on top of that, the immediate emergency, and this is the most simple of sciences, you apply heat to water, the water expands. So we're having ocean rise. And as if that rise from the heating of the waters wasn't just enough, the ice caps are melting, and this is exacerbating the situation. So here we have it, you know, from the waters to the fires. Nature is telling humanity, change your ways, because how can you possibly justify doing what you're doing to the planet, to the ecosystems? Remember, it's our life support systems. So no matter what the profit is, How can you justify that profit if you're impacting so negatively on a cascading upward scale to our very life support systems? And it's not just us as adults, it's the innocent children's life support systems. So we are very, very optimistic that a lot of humanity, enough of humanity, will come to our senses and realize we have to change our ways.
Desmond, thank you ever so much for that information and insight, concern, but also potential optimism. We will continue to bring you updates from all of the raging wildfires in Europe and across the world as they happen. But that is all we have time for all of the latest. Make sure you're staying tuned here on NewsX World.